Okay, so let's just quickly run through Taanis. I didn't prepare it, but it's a Geschmack of Taanis. I think it's for that to do. Ima mishas balmum loy af mavarach balmum loy. So the Gemara was probing what we learned out of the halacha of avoda, what's prohibited, what's allowed for a kohen doing the avoda versus a nazir. Zok Taanis Pirush, given the afin gzera shava, the misharis, since we're learning gzera shava, l'gabi when a kohen can do it, from when a kohen can do avoda, name, let's say, kamay misharis. The misharis balmum loy. Someone who's a balmum cannot do avoid in the base of mikdash. Af mevarach, so too you cannot do if you're balmum. That was the Gemara's kasher. Umishani, and the Gemara answered ha'ishkes lenazir, that we have nazir as well. And at the end, the Gemara said anyway the whole thing's midirabban, so you go to kula. Zok we can there. So from here it would seem the balmum mevarach b'chus kahanim, that a balmum can do it. Midich hachazinan the shas writes a lilmoid mevarach mimisharis. The Gemara had a havamina to prohibit a balmum from doing from duchening, because we were going to learn it from the sharis with the chinale, and the Gemara slugged it up. In Kain Zaktasis, near the le'inim nesias kapayim koin balmum noisa kapo. A koin who's a balmum may duchen. We can yesh lechiach the koin shehemer dasai. What about a koin who became an apikaris? He converted. And he's a chogashmat. Noisa kapov, he can also do nesias kapayim. He can still do it. The kosher lisa kapov, the likras b'toira kamoy shalehim. He's just as kosher to do it and to get an aliyah like somebody who is not hamer. The raya, and the raya is mihada kayhanim sheshimshu b'veis chaynov. The halacha is a kohen who actually did avoda in a base avoda zara lo yishamshu b'mikdash. They're not allowed to do avoid in the base of mikdash. But they do get a share in karbanos that are distributed. They get a share just like a balmum. So since the Gemara treats kohanim that shmadzach like a balmum, mashma the chalavoidish a balmum roy lasois yasu, and whatever a balmum may do, someone who's a shmat may also do. And we know a kohen is a balmum could do it.
Yosy,
yes.
how can you compare a balmum to a hamer or a kosher who's like by choice he decided, to not, balmum is not his fault, right? He's a mum.
You're saying a nice svara, but the Gemara says the Gemara equates them. So I guess doing the avoda.
How can you consider a kohen to be mevorachas who's been a kosher? I don't get it.
So you're saying it's not appropriate. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to. I would agree that it's not appropriate. Who wants a bracha from a kohen who's a kosher, right? But lemaisa, Allah lemaisa, he's kosher. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says. I know there's a whole shaila, a kohen who has something that's so unusual about him that it's going to cause people to look at him, or a kohen who's wearing like happy socks, like a kohen who has something that's going to cause people to look at them is a shtickle problem. A kohen's not supposed to stick out at all by duchening because we don't want someone to look. But I'm sure we're talking here about a balmum that's not so obvious, and therefore it's not something that would be a magnet to people's eyes. Okay, so the Hedel Gemara Elohein Maimados. So the Mishnah discussed the 3 times that we duchen by every Shmoneh Esrei, and Yom Kippur we are familiar with. Taanis, the Gemara, this whole Masechta has elaborated on what those are. Maimados is what the Mishnah decided to elaborate on a little bit, and it started off by bringing a pasuk of the carbon oil of the carbon tumid. The Gemara wants to my kalmar. What exactly? So Rashi, my kamar to kaboy, my mothers. The Mishnah asks, "What are my mothers?" And it brings a pasuk about carbon lachmi about the Talmud. What's the connection from that to our question of what are my mothers? So this is what the Mishnah means to say, and this is how we learned it inside the Mishnah. Elohein my mothers. These are my mothers. And then the Gemara wants to address another question. The time of my matam tikmamos. Why did they make mamodos? And that's what the Mishnah is addressing with the pasuk of the carbon tumble. So the question that the Gemara asked was, what are the mamados? And the Gemara answered by telling us why we do mamados. So that's what the Gemara has to explain. What mamados are is what we discussed, what the Mishnah mentions earlier, that people come and they fast. But why do we do those mamados? What prompted the setting up of this mamados? It's this puzzle. It's a Savas b'nei Yisrael v'mata le'emes kavni lachmi le'ishai. Correct the Gemara, which is the Mishnah asking as well. The heich karbanon shel adam karet. How is it appropriate? The morning. How is it appropriate that the carbon that's representing Klal Yisrael, every individual of Klal Yisrael, is brought and he's not watching it. He's not supervising it. It's incumbent upon us at least to have a representative watching the carbon on our behalf. Therefore, Skinu Nevi'im Harishon, who in the Mishnah Rashi identified as David and Shmuel, Esrim v'Arba Mishmar is 24 shifts, and I'll call Mishmar Mishmar Hayim Maimed b'Yerushalayim Shel Kohanim v'Shel Levim v'Shel Yisraelim. On every Mishmar, for every Mishmar, there was a set of designated Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim that were all part of this Mishmar team. Higiyazman Mishmar Lalois, when their week arrived, so Kohanim Levim Olam Yerushalayim, the Kohanim and Levim from everywhere in Eretz Yisrael, if they're in that shift, they'll go to Yerushalayim to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. Tanarabban, Esrim v'Arba Mishmorais. I'm going to go into the back. Hoyu be'Eretz Yisrael. There are 24 Mishmorais in Eretz Yisrael. Ushtei Meser b'Yerichai and 12 in Yerichai. So that's 24 plus 12 is 36. That doesn't correspond with what we learned. Shtei Meser b'Yerichai, well then the Fishin lehutuva. So it's going to be a total of 36, and we're just talking about 24. Elazak Gemara, Shtei Mesrei Mehen b'Yerichai. Out of the 24 Mishmaris, half of them went to Yerichai. So we're on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're 2/3 of the way down on the thin lines on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're discussing exactly the structure of the Mishmaris. So we have now, at this point, the Gemara says out of the 24 Mishmaris, 12 of them were in Yerichai. And we're going to see it doesn't really mean 12 out of 24. It means half of every Mishmar ended up in Yerichai. And we'll see how that happens. The time came for this Mishmar to check in, to do their avodah. So Chatzei Mishmar, only half of the Mishmar went to Yerushalayim to do the avodah. But the Chatzei Mishmar, half of the Mishmar, and it could be this base changed it to Yerichai, because there is a shaila how you learn this. But we're going to learn is that they went to Yerichai instead of going to Yerushalayim. They went to Yerichai as the base in Sion is Yerichai. So half of them were dispatched to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, and the other half were dispatched to go to Yerichai. And what did they do in Yerichai? There's a whole lot of people in their shift that went to Yerushalayim. Well, they don't have any supplies. They can't bring with them a week of food. So because of that, there was a designated team in Yerichai. I guess that was close enough to be their staging ground to prepare food and whatever else they would need. Good morning. Let's see Rashi. How did it work out the 12 of the Mishmar to Yerushalayim? The team would split. And then half of the group went to Yerichai. They provided a hospitality service for these traveling Mishmar people. All 24 Mishmaris split up. So therefore it comes out that Yud Beis B'Yerichai. That's why it worked out that 12 were in Yerichai, because half of each Mishmar ended up in Yerichai. And the Mepharshim tell us that it's not fair. Why would you want to be doing the hospitality service? Why wouldn't you want to be doing the avodah? So the Mepharshim tell us that they switched off. And the question is, they switched off 1 year this way, 1 year that way, or they switched off during the week, half of the week. But there's a shaila how they did it, but they didn't switch off.
So maybe I missed it, but why Yerichai specifically?
I guess it was close enough that it was a good staging ground.
It was like halfway. It was like what, halfway point from other parts of Eretz Yisrael.
Yericho is pretty close. Yericho is right
No,
out
it's
of
not. It's close to Yerushalayim, right?
Yeah, Yericho is very close to Yerushalayim. So I guess it was a good place to have their catering service.
Okay.
They had industrial kitchen facilities available there. I'm not sure why Yericho. Maybe it's because they ate a lot of dates, and Yericho had a lot of date trees, but I don't. That's just speculation. You know I'll save it for later because it's running late. Zok Gemara, Kadesh Yispagu Mayin Umazain Lachem Shbushlam. Amar Bidam Shmuel, Kehanim Ulavim Yisraelim Ma'akvenis Akarban. Zok Rashi, what does it mean Ma'akvenis Akarban? Im Ein Maimed Mikulam Yerushalayim. If there is not representation from each one of these groups in Yerushalayim, the karbanos are going to be possible. He did not like we do. Al kol mishmar hayam maimed b'Yerushalayim shel kaihanim ulavim v'Yisraelim. Even the chulu bailim, since they're al bailim, be'inan de lahava kamayu al gabe avodah. So we need proportional representation that matches the fabric of society. That same representation is required by the Beis Hamikdash, by the karbanos. Okay. Zok Tehillah Gemara, but Masnisa Tana, we learned in a brayso. Rab Shimon ben Elazar Aimer, Kehanim Ulavim Ukleishir Ma'akvin as a carbon. Actually, the Gersha sticks in Yisraelim. Kehanim Ulavim be Yisraelim, because like we learned a moment ago, it's all of the members in the Mishmar are Ma'akiv, Ukleishir, and the instruments are Ma'akiv as a carbon. Now we had this already in Masechah Sukkah about whether or not instruments are Ma'akiv the carbon. The Ma'akiv, why should instruments be ma'akiv the carbon? What's the svara of that mandamar? And what's the svara of the mandamar who holds instruments are not ma'akiv the carbon? Because the first brayso that we quoted only lists off Kehanim Levim v'Yisraelim, but it doesn't list off Klei Shir. But the second brayso does list off Klei Shir. Zok Gemara, Mar Sovar, one holds Iker Shir B'Peh, and since Iker Shir B'Peh, Rashi is Uchli Lebesuma Kalma Ba'alma, it's just to make it sound better, but that's not the main mitzvah of shir. And if there's levim there, then the levim provide the peh, and there's no need to have musical instruments. Umar Savar, but the other mandamar who says instruments are makiv, Savar Iker Shira Bekli, they hold Iker Shira is Bekli, and therefore you need to have the instrument there. Rashi's avav was some type of flute, but there has to be the keli there, otherwise you don't have the music. It's interesting that Tosfos says exactly the opposite of this, and the Achronim jump upon it. So let's just see quickly Tosfos. Ma'aser Iker Shir B'Peh. So remember, Rashi says if Iker Shir B'Peh, then instruments are not ma'akiv. Zok Tosfos, if Iker Shir is B'Peh, l'kach hakol ksher ma'afilu psulim. Therefore, anyone is kosher. Afilu mamzerim loy mershira, l'hav ela B'Peh. Uman da amar Iker Shir B'Chli. If you hold Iker Shir B'Chli, in case tzarich shiur kehanim or levim, then it has to be dafka kehanim or levim. The kli zemer hayakodesh. So this is exactly the opposite of what we're learning. So I think what Tosfos is saying is, if Iker Shira is B'Peh, is B'Chli, then you need to have a proper band. If you need to have a proper band, then those who blow the band, who blow the flute, and who are the musicians, also have to be people who are roy kahanim levim. Masha'enkin, if Iker Shira B'Peh, then it doesn't really matter so much who's doing it. It's not like a serious orchestra required. But the Achronim have a very big problem with this. Because the Torah says. Let's see the Gemara right. Amar Rab Chama bar Guria Amar Rav. Moshe tiking lahen Yisrael shmoyne mishmos. Moshe started off with shmoyne mishmos. So Dave Zolti asked, when we learned this originally, is until David came along, until Shmuel came along, what did they do? So I said a boichsvar that maybe they had people volunteering to supervise, but it wasn't in such an organized fashion. What they did is they organized it. But from the Gemara here, you see that Moshe Rabbeinu already set it up. Moshe Rabbeinu was around by the Mishnah. So from day one, they had mishmaris. They just didn't have 24. They only had 8 mishmaris in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu. Arba, Mei Elazar. 4 were from the family of Elazar, who were Aaron's children. The Dalet Mei Summer, and 4 were from the family of Yisrael. But Shmuel came along, and I guess as the population grew, it needed to be further developed. He made it from 8 mishmaros into 16 mishmaros, so he doubled the amount of mishmaros. But David came along, and he expanded it to 24. Shnemar Bishnas Ha'arboim L'Malchus David Nidushu, they checked, Yimotze Behem Yibore Achayil Yazer Gilad. And if you look at those psukim there, you will find that right before it, the psukim are discussing the mishmaros. So that the 24 mishmaros, the list up the 24 mishmaros. So that's how we know that David HaMelech was miyaseh the 24 mishmaros. So we're at this point, it was 8 for Moshe.
Does that mean they just subdivided the 8 that Moshe started with?
That's how I understood it. And as the families grew, he subdivided further to more clearly define who does which group.
But he didn't bring from other sons. It was only from the sons of Elazar.
Aaron had 4 sons, and 2 survived, right? Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Isamar.
They're like, yes. Doesn't Pinchas get added though? Wasn't he added even though he wasn't a son into the Kohanim?
Right?
He was a right, but so he would have been included in one of these.
Elazar's role. There has been Elazar and Aaron. So let's see what it says over here. So right now, Moshe had 8, Shmuel had 16, and David had 24. Break the Gemara. We see otherwise from this price. Moshe Tikkun Lam Yisrael, Shemoyim Mishmaris, Arba Me'elazar, Rabba Me'samar. So far that corresponds with what we've learned, but here things change. But David and Shmuel, Bamidim al Eshem V'arba. So this indicates that it's not like David brought it to 16, and not like Shmuel brought it to 16, and David brought it to 24. It sounds like David and Shmuel together just made the jump from 8 to 24. Shenemer, Hema, Yosad, David and Shmuel, Harai ben Manasseh. It's not a stira. You have to understand what the Brisa means. And what it means is Miyasaydai shall David Ushmuel Haramasi Hemidim al Esrim Varga. Through the combined efforts of David and Shmuel, it ended up going to 24. That's one way to learn. But there's different ways to be geirs. There's actually a gersh in our Gemara, Miyasaydai shall Shmuel David Haramasi Hamidim al Esrim Varga. From the Yesod that Shmuel set up and expanded it from 8 to 16, in that vein, David further expanded it to 24. There's one girsa that actually flips around David and Shmuel for that. But whatever it is, it's not a steer because the Brisa just says the sum total of 24 without giving the detail of the development. And in fact, that's the way it was. So it's not a steer. Taanis, we have another Brisa. Moshe Tikkun Lamu Yisrael, Sheish Eshrei Mishmaros. Moshe set up 60. That's definitely not consistent with what we learned earlier, that Moshe only set up 8. And he set up Shmoyne Mei Elazar, Ushmoyne Mei Samar, and that's how you got 60. Uchsherabu B'nei Elazar B'nei Samar, B'nei Elazar had many more children. They grew, the Elazar faction of the Levium and Kohanim grew much faster than the B'nei Samar. So because of that, the generation or two later, you suddenly have many, many more than B'nai Elazar than you have B'nai Samar. So if that's the case, you would want to give them more mishmaros. So therefore, what did they do? They made it to 24. So from 60 they went to 24, which means is they gave B'nai Elazar another 8 slots. They created 8 more slots, gave that to the B'nai Elazar, and the B'nai Samar remained with their original 8 slots. Chelkom v'amidim al esem v'arba shenemar v'yimtzu b'nei Elazar rabim l'rashi advarim min b'nei Samar v'yechalkom l'bnei Elazar roshim l'veis avois shisha asar shisha asar right l'bnei Samar l'veis avoisam shemoina. So you see that eventually they expanded Elazar's role to 16 slots, yet the b'nei Samar remained at 8 slots. So this is a pretty good.
Proportionally, he's losing days.
Sure, the B'nai Samar are losing. Of course, they're losing. Yeah, they're losing a lot. Yeah. The Omer. So we have a very good right. It's pretty explicit that Elazar went to 16, B'nai Samar stayed at 8. But then the Gemara finds a reason, a need to bring another pasuk. which is puzzling. Beis Av Echad Ochud LeLozer. They gave another Beis Av to Elazar. In other words, whatever he had until now, they gave him a duplicate of that. So he had 8 seats until now. They gave him another 8 slots. The Achaz Li Summer, but a summer just got what he had up until that point. Why was it necessary to bring this second pasuk when the first pasuk seems to be pretty clear that it ended up with 16 to Elazar and 8 to the summer? You might not have said it. You might say, you might argue that the same way Bnei Elazar grew, Bnei Yisamar grew. Bnei Yisamar only ended up with 8 now. You're right, but maybe they started off with 4. Maybe Shmoina Meikar Arba. Maybe the Bnei Elazar, they started off with 16, and they started off with 8. They went to 16. Bnei Yisamar, maybe they only started off with 4 and they went to 8, because this pasuk, the first pasuk quoted, just discusses what was the end game, that it was 16 to Elazar and 8 for Yisamar. But no one ever says how much Yisamar started off with. Tashma, Beis Av Echad, Achaz LaLazar. Elazar doubled his slots, but Achaz Li Samar, but Yisamar remained with the same amount that he had up until that point, which means if he had 8 now, that's what he had before. I'll call upon them Tiyufta de Rab Chama Bar Goya. This brisa argues with Chama Bar Goya, because Rab Chama Bar Goya says that Moshe started only with 8 mishmaros, yet this brisa says that Moshe started with 16 mishmaros. Amalach Rab Chama Bar Goya Tanaihi. In fact, it's a machlokes Tanaim how many mishmaros Moshe Rabbeinu started off with. And I could be consistent with a Tana that we quoted earlier, right over here, at the 4th wide line, where it says that Moshe started with 8. So we actually have a machlokes Tanaim if Moshe started with 8 or if Moshe started with 16. And like Avigdor mentioned, whether Moshe started with 8 or with 16 doesn't give anybody more frequency in doing the avodah. It was just a question of how clearly defined their timing was. But it didn't change the reality of how many kehanim there were versus the amount of work that was available to be done. Taner Rabbanan, Arba Mishmaris Olu B'Nagloy. After Galus Bavel, not everybody came back. There are some people who remained. They had a good setup in Galus, and they decided that they were not going to come back to the Beis Hamikdash. And Ezra worked very hard to attract people to come back. So who came back? Belain, Yadya, Charim, Pashkar, and Emar. These 4 families came back. So it's 4 out of 20. So Amdu Neviim Shebeneim, if there's 24 slots available and only 4 families, so every family is going to have to take 6 slots, their original slot, plus 5 additional, because they have to fill in those slots for the families that did not return. So Amdu Neviim Shebeneim, and now we'll turn out to Chazayin nowadays. V'cholkom, and they redistributed the slots that were given to the original Kohanim. Rashi's the Cholkom L'Chof Dalet. They took these 4 families and they made 24 portions, and then they allotted each of these 4 families 1/6. What they did was, how did they split them? By making a shtickle blur. So they made 24 opportunities that they put onto a paper. They put it into a box, balalim, they mixed it all up, like Akiva has that mixing machine for the raffles, where he mixes the tickets. Balalim, v'nostum akalpi, they put them into a box. Ba Yudaya, the first family came. V'not al chelkoi, v'chelek chaverov, sheish. He went and took his chelek, adding to it the 5 chalokim from 5 of his associate families, which gave him a sum total of 6. Okay, now how did you work it out? If there's 6 families now, or if the family of Yudaya has 6, how do you work out when each one did their avodah? So we'll see Rashi in a second. And then B'charim v'not al chelkoi v'chelet chaver sheish v'chein pashchar v'chein emar period. So let's see Rashi how this got distributed. Ba Yudaya, which is the 3rd line from the top of it, Mishmor shel Yudaya, Ba echad men, a representative from this family came. V'noit al cheloi the chelek hey chaticha is klaf tavlushesh. And he would take 5 pieces of cloth that were there in the box, representing 5 other mishmaris who didn't come back. So now we know what we got. He took 5 families, but the first one that he picked out, that would get the first week. So what set up the order? What set up the order is based on what he pulled out first, what he pulled out second, what he pulled out third. So there was his own mishmar, which was designated already in the first Beis Hamikdash. Following that, the next 5 weeks would be the next 5 people that he pulls out from the box. Zok to Gemara weiter. V'chein hisnu neviim shebeneim. Now the neviim made us at night. What would happen if once the Beis Hamikdash Hasheni is moving, it's going, it's progressing, so the Johnny come lately show up, and now the original families come back and they say we want our root back, we want our slot back. So they made up Shafilu Yodav. I think that's not the right word. I think it's Yarif, right? Yarif was one of the families who we know had a slot in the first place. He was the first one. If he shows up later, Yedaya would still get his first original slot. Yedaya Iker, the Yerav Tafel. So even though we'll give Yerav back his family slot and we'll condense Yedaya's 6 slots into 5 slots, nevertheless, Yedaya will get his slot before Yerav because he came up. Zok Rashi, v'chein hisnu shafil Yerav shoyev v'mitus rishon l'mishmaros. If he's olam and agodah, if he comes back, lo yitchi Yedaya. Since Yerav didn't come back at the beginning, therefore elakol mishmaros and nasos miyedaya kodomos la'avodah Yerav. So even though he has to condense his 6 slots into 5 slots, but those 5 slots are before the 1 slot that Yerav gets back. He will be in the place of a different mishmar, even though he used to be the first mishmar. He no longer is the first mishmar. Now he's going to be the 6th mishmar. You have to condense the 6 slots that Yedaya had into 5. So we're not permanently removing Yerav slot, but he's no longer in the prime position. How do you know they lay voracious? How do you know what parsha they're supposed to lay? If it wasn't for the Maimados, the world wouldn't have a kiyum. Avram asked for a symbol, a sign that he's going to get at Yisrael. Amar Avram Rebbeinu Shalom. Avram told Rebbeinu Shalom, I'm sure you told me we're going to get at Yisrael. But Shema Yisrael chotin lefanecha. Maybe they're going to do Averis. And not the Oiselahem Kedor HaMabel Uchador HaFlaga. And then they're going to lose it. Amaloi Lav. I won't do that. Amar Lefana, but Rebbeinu Shalom Haydeini B'Mever Yishayna. Bring me a shtickle raya. I need some reassurance. Amalei Chali Egel Mishaleshes of Eiz Mishaleshes. This was the Brisman Absar. Amar Lefana. So Avraham said that wasn't good enough. He still wasn't reassured. So Rebbeinu Shalom Teinach Bizman Shebeis Hamikdash Kayim. I understand when they have karbanos and they could be mechaper on their averis. There, I understand they'll be in a safe place and they'll get Eretz Yisrael. But Bizman Shein Beis Hamikdash Kayim. If there's no karbanos, not Tehillim, what's going to be with my children? Amar Loi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu responded, Kvartakanti lahem seder karbanos. I already was mistaken for them to say with their mouth, to say karbanos. Bizman shekarim bahem lefanai. When people say karbanos, malani aleim ki ilu hikrivim lefanai. I consider it like they brought the karbanos. V'ani moichel lahem al kol avonis. Now we'll be moichel them on all their goods. So let's see Rashi again. What's the connection between laning Parshas Bereshis and the Maimados? So we see that it's the karbanos that saved the world. So let's see what Rashi says. Omer Basi L'Tishal Molam Maimados. Iski karbanos Yisrael Oisenhein how you call him bechetem. If it wasn't the fact that Klal Yisrael are Oisek and karbanos, we would have self-destructed with our averis. Mishahein Kohen, once Klal Yisrael is eliminated, Shemayim Ba'eretz Ha'imdim B'Schusam Ein Miskayim. then the Shemayim Ba'aretz that's only in existence because of Klal Yisrael, because we do the mitzvahs, with the Rebbe Shem ambassador here. If we're gone, there's no world. Kanchi Dar Mabel. So Avram told Hashem, you see there, where's destruction? Shemach Shein Kohen Elohim Miskayim. V'hoyel shall iske carbon ha'elam maimed, since the whole world is standing only because of carbonis, lekach koyin anshi maimid b'areim b'may separations. That's the reason why the parasha that they lane is my separations. So Hashem says, "Fa'takanti lehem kozman shekoyin behem." So Rashi, Mehecha Yalef Lo Lahai Gimel. Rashi doesn't know exactly where this comes from. That saying karbonis is exactly like bringing karbonis. Taner Rabban. Anshe Mishmar Hoy Muspalin Al Korban Achayim Sheyiskabel B'Ratzon. Now they changed the Gersoyos over here. It's supposed to be Anshe Maimid. The Anshe Mishmar are usually the Kaihanim who are doing the work. It's the Anshe Maimid who are saying the tefillos. So I'm just going to look at the Aleph in the Goy Sagra, where he says Anshe Mishmar Roshim Olav Ois Beis Anshe Maimid Roshim Olav Ois Aleph. So I guess he has some gears to change over here. I think you're supposed to read it. Although Rashi does say Anshe Mishmar. Okay, let's see what it says about the base. Anshe Mishmar B'Shalayim Anshe Maimid Oisim Chavdal Chayyos. Okay, so the Anshe Maimid are the 24 groups that were all in the array. So let's see what it says over here. They're mispal. So that's what it sticks in. It's the Anshe Maimid that were mispal carbon achayim shishkabel v'rachon. The Anshe Maimid miskansen ol basic knesses, and then Anshe Maimid go in to the basic knesses. Also, here's where he changed. Here's where the base sticks in the Anshe Maimid. So the Anshe Maimid, which is really how we're Goris, Rashi was Goris Anshe Mishmar, we're Goris Anshe Maimid, are miskansen ol basic knesses. The Yoshvin Dalet Taanis, and they fast 4 Taanis. So during the week, there's 4 days that they fast. They don't fast Sunday. They fast B'Sheni B'Shabbos. They fast Monday. They fast B'Shlishi Tuesday, B'Revi Wednesday, B'Chamishi and Thursday. B'Sheni, what is the special tefillah that they're focused on when they fast on Monday? Al Yoridei Hayam, on people who are traveling in the Midbar. Why traveling in the oceans? Why is that? What does the Monday have to do with traveling in the oceans? So Rashi says the Chsiv B'Sheni, a pasuk that the Torah says in Parashat Bereshis for the second day, it says Yehi Rakir B'Soich Hamayim. So you see, we're discussing water. That's why it's a good time to daven for people who are in danger in the water. You have to be meratzed on things that were created that day. B'Shlishi on Tuesday, Al Hoichel Mibaris for people who are traveling in the deserts. And Rashi says the Chsiv V'Seiroya Hayabosha. That's what it says on Tuesday. The Yabosha should be appropriate for people who need to travel over it. They shouldn't get hurt from dangerous animals. So that's day 3. For Wednesday, Al Askara so the children shouldn't suffer from this terrible condition called Askara. Why is that? Because on Wednesday is the day that the sun, the moon, the stars was all set up. It says it without a vav, Miloshin Klola. So you see that there's a reference to the Klolas that could happen, such as Askara on Wednesday. They daven for uboros, fetuses and children that are still nursing. Well, they fasted out of that. I'm sure it's both. I mean, the Brisa says they fasted. The Pasha says they daven, right? And then there's uboros shelo yapilu, that they should survive full term. They should be able to nurse. Result Rashi, uboros. What's the shaykhs from uboros to day 5? You see, that was a time of tremendous reproduction and growth. Uber Shabbos on Friday, if they fight Shabbos because of covered Shabbos, surely on Shabbos itself you don't fast either. What about Sunday? My time alloy. Why don't we fast on Sunday? Rabbi Yochanan Zok Rashi. What does noitrim mean? This is a little bit of a shaila. The Christians the Christians made a Yom Tov. And therefore, since the Christians made a Yom Tov, but on Sunday the Christians have a Yom Tov, so we don't want to acknowledge anything about that day. There's a lot of Torah on here because the Christians came, I think, at the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, right? So what happened before that?
Paul is the one who changed Shabbos to Sunday.
Right. There's even Shitas who hold that Paul was Jewish, and he
Paul was Saul. He converted on the road to Damascus.
But supposedly there's a Shita, the Rishonim, that hold that he was really a Firmiyid till the day he died, but he sacrificed his Ruchnius to create a very big change in Christianity, so that there should be a big red line in between Yiddishkeit and Christianity. So there is such a svara. When was man created? On Friday. Day 3 would be Sunday. And what's the significance of that? So Rashi, Shlishi Yitzira, the Adam never be Shishi. The person was created on Friday. We know Yom Shlishi Lamila, the third day after a traumatic experience, the person is always weak. There's actually a shaila. What happens if a baby boy is born Friday afternoon, but we don't know, it was Ben Hashemashah, so we don't know if it was Friday or if it was Shabbos. So the following week, we can't give the child a bris on Friday, because it might not be day 8, it might be day 7, if the child was born already on Shabbos. On Shabbos, you can't give the child a bris, because just in case Friday was day 8, Shabbos is day 9, a bris shaloi bismanoi is not like a Shabbos. So there are those poskim who hold that you can't do the bris on Sunday either. Why? Because that doesn't make sense. It's already 11 days. It's already 11 days because it's the third day after the Shabbos morning. That doesn't make sense. I must have misunderstood what I heard, because that wouldn't be day 3 of the child being born. That would be day 11 of the child being born. So I'm making a mistake. Or day 9. Okay, so let's go back here. Shlokish Amar Mipnei Neshama Yisera. Rashi should noitel oisim imenu avacholish. We had the Neshama Yisera all Shabbos. We lose a much of Shabbos, which weakens us a little bit, and therefore it's not a good day for fasting. Domer Shlokish Neshama Yisera nitna by ba'adam be'erev Shabbos, and Neshama Yisera is added to a person on erev Shabbos. And the Matzai Shabbos noitel oisim imenu is taken away from him. Shenemar Shabbos vayinavash. Kivin Shabbos, once you had Shabbos and you had the experience of Neshama Yisera, when Shabbos goes away, you feel the loss and you say, Vai of the Nefesh, Vai, I lost part of my soul. What is this Neshama Yisera? What does it do? So Rashi brings it down to very practical application. Neshama Yisera, Shemar Chivin Daiter Lechilu Shtia. A person on Shabbos is able to eat so much more than he could normally eat on a regular weekday. Think about it. A guy davens in the Vesikim Minyan, and after the Vesikim Minyan, is a Kiddush. So he's learning, and then he hears that the Ashkama Minyan is having a Kiddush. So let's go join them as well. Once they're by the Ashkama Minyan, they're staying there and partying with a Kiddush. They had a little much to drink, they're tipsy, so they're partying until the main Minyan Kiddush comes in. And then they have the main Kiddush. So they already are on their third Cholent, their third Kugel, and then they go home and they eat all over again. And then they rush back for Shalosh Shudas to eat even again. So you see, that wouldn't be possible with a normal neshama. Clearly, there's a neshama Yisera making all this possible. And then much Shabbos, especially after you have pizza at the Avos Abanim program, then the neshama Yisera leaves you in a very violent fashion, and it takes throughout much Shabbos and Sunday for its departure.
Isn't it very strange that your neshama should add physicality should be added because of your neshama? Like,
I guess so. Or I guess if you feel you're full, it's all in your mind. Very good. You see what Dr. Goldar said? All this food is it's spiritual food. It's Tito, it's Glenlivet. These are all spiritual types of things.
You're saying that the Neshama Yisera leaves you with a Ruach Ra on Motzei Shabbos.
An emptiness. Okay, it's Dr. Gemara. B'yom HaRishon, Bereshis v'Hirakia. That's what they laid on the first day. Tana we learned Bereshis b'Shnayim, the Parsha of Bereshis, which has 5 psukim, they can use, that's for Kohen and Levi. Yirakia be'echad, that was the Yisrael, that was Shlishi. Zoktamar Bishlami Yirakia be'echad. I understand why the second parsha of Yirakia could only support one aliyah, because Tlos Psuka, it's only 3 psukim. Elaborations b'shnayim, how could you split the first parsha into 2 aliyahs? Hey Psuka, it's only 5 psukim. So you need 3 psukim for aliyah. With Vitani we learned a karbater al yivchosh begimel psukim. So how do you get 2 aliyahs out of 5 psukim? But when Rav says we do what we do in Rosh Chodesh. We learn the first 3 psukim for the first aliyah, and for the second aliyah we go back a pasuk. Shmuel says no, you cut the pasuk in half, and the first aliyah gets 2.5 psukim, and the second aliyah gets 2.5 psukim. Zok to Gemara. Rav Amar Doilet. Rav who said you go back a pasuk. My time alo emor pasuk. Why didn't he say you just split the pasuk in half? The Gemara Kasavar he holds called psukla de lepaski Moshe and non lepaskinan le. We have no right to cut psukim in half. Therefore, we have to read psukim as a whole. So the only way to get 2 aliyahs is to go back a pasuk. Or Shmuel Amar Paisik, you cut a pasuk in half. Frank the Gemara, how could Shmuel allow that to meet paskinan? Can you split a pasuk in half? We said that Reb Chanina Kara, he called out, I was very upset that I expressed by Chanina Gadol, and because I wanted to do half psukim. The only time he allowed me to learn half a psukim is when I was teaching small children, and they're not able to digest a whole pasuk at a time. So there he allowed me to go. So Rashi tells us, Reb Chanina Kra, not he called him Reb Chanina Kra was his nickname. He was called Reb Chanina Kra, you know why? Because he was the Baal Korah. Show you Baal Mikra. The Yoid of a Girsa Baki B'Tam. Reb Chanina, they called him Reb Chanina Kra because he knew the psukim perfectly. And since he knew them perfectly, that was a sort of his nickname. And he wanted to allow half psukim. Targodo, Harbi Terachli V'Chazarti Alav, Sheyatili, lives like a pasuk l'shnayim. I pushed very hard to get Reb Chanina Agadol to allow me to split up psukim. And he allowed it, but only for this purposes, not to split it up for an aliyah. What's the reason why it was allowed to split up a pasuk for the children? Because there's no other way. There's simply no other way to teach the children. So you will learn from here, whenever you're in an impossible situation, there's no other way, you're also allowed to split up psukim. So Hachanami lo yevsher. So Shmuel will say, Hachanami lo yevsher, there's no way to do it, you have to split the pasuk up. Shmuel Amar Paisik, my time Amar Doilim. My time Amar Doilim. We're saying there's no other way. What's wrong with Doilim? Why couldn't Shmuel use Rav's solution and just start the second aliyah, 1 pasuk back? So tomorrow he doesn't like that idea. Because meaning, let's say someone shows up late to Laning, and he shows up at the beginning of the second aliyah, and he hears them start his aliyah about a 3rd pasuk. So he makes an assumption that means the first aliyah only had 2 psukim. Oh, I guess then an aliyah only needs to have 2 psukim. So that's the gzer mishum anachnosin. The gzer mishum ayoichin is if somebody leaves after Kayin, he sees that they lay 3 psukim, and then he leaves, he assumes for Levi they only lay 2 psukim. So once again, it's going to cause people to think that an aliyah could be less than 3 psukim, and therefore Shmuel doesn't like this idea of Dayah. I don't know where that rule comes from. The Gemara quotes it from a Brisa, and the Gemara does not bring a makar for it. So I don't know the answer to that. May say for Gemara. Parasha shall shisha psukim. If you have a parasha of 6 psukim, that's simple. Kari noisa b'shnayim. You can make 2 aliyahs out of it because you have 3 and 3. V'shal chamisha. But if there's 5 psukim, and let's see the Bach, because there's Yosy over here. If there's 5 psukim, psukim, and if it's 5 psukim, Harishain, so he skips all this, Harishain Kara Gimel, the first aliyah gets the first 3 psukim. Hasheni Kara Shnai Mi Parshazu, the second aliyah finishes off the 2 psukim from the first parsha, Ve'echel Parsha Acheres, and they continue on to the next tickle, and they say a pasuk to the next parsha. The Yesharim Gimel, and there are those who say that the second aliyah will have to continue 3 psukim into the new parsha. You never lane less than 3 first psukim of every parsha. Frek the Gemara, Lamandam or Doilig Lidlam. If you hold like Rav, why would you need to do this? Just go back a pasuk. Lamandam or Pasuk, lives like, and according to Shmuel, wanted to cut the third pasuk in half. Why does this Bryce not even consider any one of the two solutions that Rav and Shmuel offered? Dr. Shiny Hasam, the Islay Rav, there's plenty of room. You just continue on to the next pasuk. Here you can't. Rashi says, you know why you can't? Let's see the first Rashi. You know why? The only parashas that are dedicated for today are these two parashas. So you can't continue on to learn what they're supposed to learn tomorrow. So you're confined to these two parashas, one with 5, one with 3, and you'll have to make the best of them. And therefore, you have to either be doiled or you have to be poisik, and you cannot continue on to the next parasha to get your psukim. Defaulted. So let's stop here. You have a wonderful, wonderful. Everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful day. Right?